Welcome, friends. My name is Mary Vano, and as you know, I am the priest and rector of St. Margaret's in Little Rock. And I'd like to introduce you to Darren Herring. Darren is a pilgrimage consultant for Faith Journeys, and he is helping us plan a pilgrimage to Scotland. In July of 2022, we are planning to take a trip together to visit Scotland, to explore the sites of Christian mission throughout the country, and to explore our heritage with St. Margaret in particular. So today, Darren and I are here to answer some questions that might be relevant as you consider whether this trip is right for you. And I hope that you will consider it. So Darren, why don't you get started with some of our questions?
Well, sure. Thanks so much for talking with me today. And one thing I do want to mention before we get into the questions is the itinerary that we put together is a fully customized and handwritten itinerary for St. Margaret's. We wanted to really delve into the life of St. Margaret of Scotland, and so we wrote this itinerary for you. No one else has ever done this itinerary before.
That's right. I had great fun imagining it out and planning it with Darren. It's been great.
Definitely. So I'm going to ask, I know you're going to ask me some questions later. I'm going to ask you some questions now because I think there's some things people might like to know. So my first question is, have you ever been on a pilgrimage before?
I have actually been on two pilgrimages in my lifetime. One was a trip to Italy when I was in college. I had a religious art and architecture professor whom I greatly admired. And every summer he took students to usually Italy, sometimes Italy and Greece, to explore Christian history and art and architecture. The one year I was available to go was actually the one year he was not offering the trip. And that was because his church had been clamoring for him to take a group of church members on pilgrimage. And so he wasn't taking students, but I was not daunted. I just went and begged and asked him to make an exception for me and allow me to join his church members on pilgrimage. And he allowed me and one other student to do that. And I continue to be grateful. That trip was really important to me. One of the ways that it was important to me was that I had an experience on the trip that allowed me to say yes to the calling that I had already begun to discern to become a priest in the Episcopal Church. I had been daunted and afraid. And on that trip, God encountered me and told me that it was okay to say yes. And so I came home from that trip with two ideas. One is that I would enter into discernment in the Episcopal Church toward priesthood. And the other was that I would someday eventually lead other people on a pilgrimage. 20 years later, as some of my St. Margaret's members will remember, in 2017, I received a Lilly grant to take my family on sabbatical. And that time I was able to plan a pilgrimage for my family. It was themed around the Holy Family. And we made a trip through England and France and Italy. And along the way, stopped to see paintings and other artistic portrayals of the Holy Family. And again, a profound experience, and one that I think is continuing to feed and refresh and nurture me for ministry. So now I'm finally coming back to that decision I made many years ago that someday I would plan and lead a pilgrimage for church members. And so I'm very excited to be offering this.
Excellent. Well, the listeners probably don't really know me, but I'll quickly, my background, I'm actually married to an Episcopal priest, and I'm Episcopalian. My wife is the Reverend Canon Holly Herring. She's the canon precentor at Trinity Cathedral in Phoenix, Arizona. And with my background, which is in music, I actually got to live in Scotland for several years, I was a lay clerk at St. Mary's Cathedral. And when you go to Edinburgh, you'll actually see the Episcopal Cathedral there. But also got to travel around quite a bit and did my master's at the University of Edinburgh. So some of the sites in here I know personally because I've been to. So the question I have for you, Mary, is what are you most looking forward to seeing or doing while you're in Scotland?
I think the thing that I'm most excited about right now is seeing Iona. I have known a few people who have visited Iona, and none of them have had very many words for it, but they have conveyed that it's one of those thin places where it seems that you're just really near to God. And so I'm excited to get to go and spend some time there. I'm already doing some reading on the history and enjoying that. That'll be one thing among many that I expect to enjoy.
And Iona is one of those sites that it really truly feels like a pilgrimage to go to because it's not particularly easy to get to. I mean, we have the luxury here in the United States of being able to get pretty much anywhere we want to go in our own personal cars. To get to Iona, you're going to have to go to Oban and take a ferry across to the Isle of Mull. Then you're going to have to drive across the Isle of Mull to Fionfort, which is on that sea on the western side. Then you have to take another ferry across to get to Iona. So it's while you're making that journey, you can think about Saint Columba and all of the other early saints of the church that went back and forth from that place on a regular basis. Now we tied a lot of the itinerary into Saint Margaret. There are also other saints that we've tied in, including Saint Columba. But I'm interested in what's your favorite part of the story about the legend of Saint Margaret of Scotland.
Well, I've been doing some additional reading lately about Margaret, and I ran across a story about which I was unfamiliar. She had apparently she was caught red-handed stealing from her husband, the king's treasury, on more than one occasion, so that she could give that money to the poor. Her biographer, who was a friend of hers, refers to this as her pious pillaging. And so I just really love the spunk of character that shows, that she was bold and unafraid to do what she felt she needed to do to take care of the poor. But also the story exhibits the love and admiration that I think she developed in her husband, Malcolm, who is known to have been pretty brutal, honestly. But she is also known as a reformer of him. And in these moments of thievery, he took it in stride and referred to her as his little thief. And in general supported her acts of charity. So that's a fun story.
Excellent. She was surprisingly well respected for her time as a woman as well. She was counsel to many other kings and things, which is amazing for a woman of that time period. Let's talk a little bit about pilgrimage and the way that we have put together the itinerary, because I know that's something that you and I had discussed. We are a company that does this for groups going all over the world, but one of the things we do is use our expertise not only as Christians, but also as consultants in the travel industry to be able to put together something that isn't a sightseeing trip. Although there are sites involved that may not particularly be religious. I always use the example of if you're going to Paris on a religious trip, you want to see the Eiffel Tower. So when you're going to some of these sites, obviously you've traveled that far, you want to see particular sites that may not have a strong religious affiliation, but are still important historically. But what we want to do is make sure that we're adding in sites that are meaningful, sites that have a deep tie to our Christian heritage, and to add into the time there, not just learning about the history of that site and its importance, but also having time to reflect, having time for personal prayer, and to really absorb what's going on. There's a great quote by actually the I guess you would call him the retired Pope, Pope Benedict, who says, to go on pilgrimage means to step out of ourselves in order to encounter God where he has revealed himself before. God has been in those sites, and that's why they're important, but also God is drawing us to those sites today to connect the two. And it's when we meet God on the road that really solidifies that pilgrimage experience.
I'm really excited about the fact that this trip is a pilgrimage. I think Celtic spirituality actually also gives us this idea that everything we do can be an act of devotion. And in this case here, our trip itself will be an act of spiritual devotion. That doesn't mean that we're not going to also have a great time and have a lot of fun and learn a lot of history and see a lot of interesting things along the way. But what we see and what we do will be within this frame of encountering God. And who knows what can happen on such a trip, but that's part of the exercise.
Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, says that pilgrimage is at the very heart of our faith, and it's true. It is. I suppose every day is a pilgrimage. Our life is a pilgrimage. So, what can we add in to bring ourselves closer to each other, to bring ourselves closer to God, to bring ourselves closer to the world? And pilgrimage is one of those things. One thing that we have made sure to add in is the opportunity for corporate worship. We think that that's very important. So there is opportunity and that are built in to do, to celebrate the Eucharist, to pray compline together, to do morning prayer. So we've made sure that that's added in as well, because we think that that is an important element. You are a community when you're together in your parish. You're a smaller bit of that community is going to travel together, and we want you to feel that sense of connection that we really only get in corporate worship, and that we've all missed for the past 18 months.
So much so. Okay, well, Darren, there are a few questions that I'm sure our potential participants would like to know about. So let me ask you some of these. First of all, tell me about the price of the trip. What is included and what is not included in that price?
Sure. There is a portal that the group has been placed on. I know that many of you have that link already. Within it, you will find a digital version. Oh, I can't do that very much, of a brochure. And if you pull that up, there's actually information about the pricing in here, but I'll go over it with you so you have it now. We have priced the trip based on different categories, and the three categories we chose were at the smallest 20 people and at the most 30 or more. So the price varies a little bit according to how many people you have, because there are particular shared costs of any group travel, and those are things like the motor coach or the guide that's going to be with you the entire time. So the more people we have sharing that set fee, the less the cost is going to be per person. So right now we're ranging from $3,805 without air to $3,440 with 30 or more. Now, when we add air into that, the prices go to $5,495 for the 20 or more. So we'll just use that one for right now. But that price can go down if we are able to get more people. Also, when we come to price, we cannot get an air contract for your group this early. No one can. Even if you were trying to get air for yourself, you can only do it about 11 months before the plane would actually depart. So what we've done is we've estimated the airfare, and we've estimated it based on what it was historically. We all know that we had a pretty exceptional year. So we're finding that air is coming back less than what we've expected. We've been able to save people money. And when we do that, we can pass it on. So when we are able to get the final air contract and share that with you, then we may say, oh, well, actually, it's $200 less than what we said, and we're going to knock that off of the cost. But we don't know that. And we obviously don't want to come to you and say, hey, that price we told you, it's actually going to be more than what we said. So we always overestimate the cost, and then we'll fix it in the end to make sure that that's passed along to you. And so you were asking about, could the price go up or down? That certainly affects the price. When it comes to the price going up, you could go with less than 20. And what we would need to do is just refigure what the pricing is based on the final number of people that you had traveling. I think that you won't have any trouble getting 20 people that are interested in this. In fact, hey, I might go because it's a great itinerary. I would be really excited to do it myself.
Yes.
And you wanted to know what was included. So one of the pages of the brochure, the digital brochure that you have, I printed one out so I could just have it for reference, has a list of what's included. We include in that upper price the airfare, round trip. Then everyone has included the ground transportation. So that's the motor coach the entire time you're out of the country. Accommodations are in 3- and 4-star hotels. They're based on double occupancy. They're going to be hotels that we are familiar with, that we have used, that come recommended because of their cleanliness, their spaciousness, their customer service. So we know that they are top quality hotels. And in fact, if you go to the brochure, you will see there are 3 hotels listed. The Oban Bay Hotel and Spa, the St. Columba Hotel, and the Holiday Inn Gestorfen. And they are in blue, which tells you in a PDF that they're hyperlinks. And if you click that, it will actually take you to the hotel's webpage, and you can look around and see what the property actually looks like and what amenities they have. We've included meals, which are breakfast and dinner. Breakfast will be at the hotel every day. Dinner will be a mix, sometimes at the hotels, sometimes at restaurants. We leave lunches out because we like to give you a couple of hours free. You'll be in central areas where your guide will be able to tell you, oh, if you can eat at this restaurant or this restaurant, you can have your choice. But you may want to grab a quick sandwich and go see a church that you passed, or do some shopping, or explore a museum. You may want to skip lunch. You may want to sit down and have a Michelin-starred lunch. And if you want to, you have the time to do that. But it leaves the availability for you to make that choice instead of many of you have probably traveled to Europe, and so you know the thought of seating 30 people in the same restaurant at lunchtime in a city like Edinburgh is probably impossible. It's just not something you're going to see with the smaller restaurants like you could do in the States. The entrance fees have been included. So anything that's listed in the itinerary, as you read through that, if it's listed there, then the entrance has been paid. So you don't have to worry about showing up and then saying, well, if you want to see this place, you're going to have to pay. That's already there. You have, let's see what else. Oh, the tour manager, you'll have a licensed guide with you the entire time. They'll be the same person. You'll also have the motor coach and driver with you the entire time. That guide will act as not only a travel guide, but also as sort of a concierge. They're there for your comfort. So if you want to know where the best place to buy a set of bagpipes happens to be, or you need some Tylenol, or you're allergic to down and the pillows in your room are down, they are there to help you and facilitate that. In fact, you don't even check in and out of the hotel. They'll check you in and give you your key. So you don't have to worry about any of those things. They're fantastic and really well versed on not only the history of the area, but also the religious aspects. We have, excuse me, we've also added in the gratuities to the guide and driver. We do that completely in a transparent way. We will collect that money in your payments, and then we will send that to Mary ahead of time in a check that she can then cash and take that money. It keeps her from having to collect money from you on the coach the day you're headed to the airport when no one has any British sterling pounds left, and it just makes it so much easier for everyone. Then there's some other little things that are added in, like some information on travel, some luggage tags, things like that. So what we've done is we've added a package that, with the exception of lunch and souvenirs that you may choose to purchase, everything is included in the cost. That makes it much easier for you to budget and know how much money you actually need to take than having to guess. Now, what's not included, and I know this question is coming up later, so I'll just briefly answer it now, is if you'd like to stay in a room by yourself. That is possible, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. That's called a single supplement. That's not included. If you are not a US citizen, you have a passport from another country, there may be visa fees that your country is required to pay that American citizens aren't. You would be responsible for those. If you'd like trip insurance, which we're going to talk about again later, you have the option of purchasing trip insurance. Transportation to the Little Rock Airport. I'm not going to come and drive you to the airport. You're on your own on that one. Drinks at dinner, and when I say that, being Episcopalian and working with Episcopal groups, I'm not talking coffee and tea and water. I'm talking, if you want a gin and tonic, that's going to be your responsibility, or a glass of wine. It just could get out of hand for us. And this way you can have what you want, and you don't have to worry about it. The lunches, and then if there are any luggage fees, you're allowed one large bag. This is a question that gets asked a lot. You're allowed one large bag, one carry-on, one personal item. Let's say you bought so much that you need to bring back a second suitcase that's checked. That would be your responsibility. But other than that, everything is included. Okay. And that's all on one of the pages in the brochure as well.
Thank you for explaining that. That's helpful. Now, I know that a trip like this does require some physical stamina. Tell us what is, what kind of stamina is required? What if someone on our trip has limited mobility or issues walking?
This itinerary we designed that it doesn't have as much walking as some of the ones we may have in say Israel, but it does have a considerable amount. I would say you'll probably be walking 3 or 4 miles a day. That's not to say you'll be walking 3 and 4 miles at a stretch, but that just means spread out over the day. So if you can walk 6,000 steps without any problem, you should be fine. The biggest problem in Europe, and especially in the United Kingdom, is the surface you'll be walking on. They aren't asphalt streets or concrete sidewalks like we're used to. It's usually stone surfaces, cobblestone or brick. So if you're wearing good, solid, sturdy shoes, you should be fine. There are always opportunities if you you're not feeling well, not able to keep up with the group. The coach is your coach for the entire time, so you could actually stay behind. The coach driver will be there, so you could do that. Or very often there are places where you can sit and rest once you're inside a particular space. I'm thinking Stirling Castle, a bit of a hill to get in it, but there's a huge open courtyard area with picnic tables and park benches and places where you could sit and rest while a group is going to see a particular thing, and then they would just meet with you before you leave. So I would say most people with limited mobility would be able to be fine. They just need to be very cognizant of what they're doing and realize that the ADA, the first A is American Disabilities Act, and British sites don't have the same regulations. So very often things may not be accessible. Okay,
thank you for that. That's helpful. Now, do you recommend or do you offer travel insurance?
We do. We are not a travel insurance company, but we do recommend a company called TripMate. The information's in the brochure.
Mhm.
The pricing of it is based on the cost of the trip.
Mhm.
You are able to then insure yourself at the level that you feel comfortable insuring yourself. We highly recommend that you do, especially with what we've just gone through with COVID, which I think we may have some questions at the end about that. There is new coverage available that is called in the industry CFAR, which stands for Cancel for Any Reason. Cancel for any reason will allow you within 48 hours of the departure to say, I've decided I don't want to go. And you would get back 75% of your non-recoverable fees, because we would be able to return some of that, and then the insurance would cover the remainder. There's also, I'll just go ahead and answer this now. Most of the insurance policies now also include some sort of quarantine coverage.
Mhm.
The company we use, it's a 14-day policy, and I can't remember what the amount is, but it's priced in to be able to afford accommodation for 14 days and food if you happen to need to be quarantined.
Tell us about the flight. How long is it going to take us to get from Little Rock to Scotland?
Well, the big question is, I don't think there are any direct flights from Little Rock to Glasgow. So we're
No.
going to have to connect somewhere, and I don't know where that's going to be yet. Let's assume it's a New York area airport.
Uh-huh.
And I don't really know how long it would take to get to New York from Little Rock. I would guess that's about a 2.5, 3 hour flight.
I think that's about right.
The flight from New York to Glasgow is 7 hours.
Okay.
So it's not a particularly long flight, but it's still an international, and usually overnight. So you will have a nice dinner and then time to have a little sleep before you arrive the next day.
Okay. Now, can I upgrade my seat if I wanted to?
Again, this is one of those questions that it's difficult to answer because we don't know which airline we're working with
Hmm.
until we seek out that contract. Some airlines will allow us to do upgrades and some won't.
Hmm.
Um, but the reason we put the pricing, and when you remember, as I was giving you pricing, I started off with one that was in the 3,000s and then gave you one that was in the 5,000s. You always have the option of going land only, which is fine. You're just opting out of using our air. It doesn't mean you couldn't fly on the same flight as the group. You would just make your own reservation. So if you wanted to upgrade to business class, or you wanted a very particular seat, and we couldn't guarantee that, you have the option of saying, I'm not going to use your air, and I'll use my own. In fact, some people may have a relative in the airline industry, or they may have points that they want to use, and that's perfectly fine. You should be able to do that if you choose.
Okay. So if I wanted to use my own airline miles, or say I wanted to extend my trip, I could just buy the land only package. Is that right?
Definitely. But one thing I will mention, if you wanted to extend your trip, but you
Mhm.
still wanted to use our air, you are able to do that. The airlines offer to groups a thing called deviation,
Mhm.
which means as long as you originate with the group, then you can deviate from it on the return. So there's a form you would fill out, and you could say, instead of flying back from Glasgow, I want to fly back from London or from Paris, and I want to fly back on this date. We would then go to the airline and say, this person or these people want to deviate. Here's the information. And then if there was any difference in the cost of the air, you would just pay the difference. There may not be any. Very often it's nothing or very small. So you can do that, but it can only be done on the return. You can't do it on the departure.
Okay, good to know. We have our 3 hotels already planned. What can we expect of the hotels?
Well, we try to use more American style hotels because that's what we're used to, and European style hotels may be a little out of our comfort zone in particular things. The room, as I said earlier, there'll be a larger room. It will be comfortable and well appointed. you will find if you are going as, let's say, two single women happen to be traveling together, in a US hotel, you would find mostly like uh, a room that has either a king bed or two queen beds. We may actually find rooms that have two twin beds in them. That's much more common in European hotels. There is even a possibility if three people wanted to share a room of getting what's called a family room. We just have to see if they're available, which usually has maybe a full or a queen size bed and two twin beds in it, for obviously designed for families with children traveling, but they let our groups use those as well. You'll find the food service is fantastic. The breakfast is probably going to be a full Scottish, which is very similar to a full English breakfast with the addition of a little haggis. And don't knock it until you've tried it. Haggis is actually delicious. You just have to give it a shot and try it. But you'll have a fantastic breakfast, and there's usually even a small bar inside most hotels as well. So in the evening, if you want to sit and have a drink and relax and talk about the day, you can do that.
You mentioned this earlier, but it is possible to have a private room. You want to say more about that?
It is, yes. We need to know, and we need to plan for that ahead of time. Unfortunately, the hotels, just like anywhere, are going to charge the same amount for a one person in a room as they charge for two people in a room. So the difference in cost comes from needing to cover that other half. In the case of this particular pilgrimage and the hotels we're using, if you needed a single room or you wanted a single room, that supplement would be $409. And then in the registration form you fill out online, you would just say that I want to have a private room, and then that will be added to your invoice. And when you pay that extra $409, you'll be guaranteed a private room.
Okay. Now, I think you said earlier we've had an exceptional year. That's one word for it.
Yes.
And there is some uncertainty about the future, and we don't have a crystal ball here, but do you expect there to be COVID restrictions for our travel next summer?
It's such a hard question to answer because things have been very fluid recently. In fact, just earlier today, actually probably less than 2 hours ago, a recommendation was made that the EU, which I know the United Kingdom is no longer part of the EU, but the European Union is recommending to drop all testing requirements for American vaccinated travelers. That's going into effect, I believe, in 2 days, according to the article I read. Things are changing. We are members of all of the major travel associations and are in contact with visitors associations all over the world, and we have offices in many places around the world as well, including one in Edinburgh. So as things are changing, we're trying to update. Again, we don't know, but my assumption would be that you need to be vaccinated, and that will probably change to where you have an actual vaccination record somehow. Many of you may have traveled years ago, and I'm old enough that I have one. I used to have one. I don't use it anymore. There was a yellow sheet of paper, like construction paper, that went inside your passport. There was a vaccination history. And when you went to particular countries, it would be required that you have particular vaccinations. I was going to Africa and I had to have one for the country I was visiting. I don't think we'll go back to that sheet, and I don't think we'll be using our vaccination cards, but I do think that there will be some sort of digital recognition, whether it's a QR code or something on your phone, or something that's recorded in the computer chip that's on the front of your passport. But there will be something, and vaccines are going to be required around the world, I would say, for the next several years. When it comes to the restrictions, it's hard to say. I mean, I would be prepared to wear masks for the next couple of years, but maybe we won't need to do that if we're vaccinated. Um, but we are constantly monitoring, constantly keeping up to date on what's happening, what's changing, and then we pass that information along as we receive it. So you don't have to worry about us, hey, okay, you're traveling and you're not going to hear from me again until, you know, you're actually on the trip and I check in. No, you're going to be hearing from us all along. You have an operations agent assigned to you named Samantha, which Mary has spoken with Samantha. They've been introduced. That she's happy to answer any questions you have at any time. I'm happy to answer any questions you have at any time, and we'll just work together on keeping everyone as updated as possible.
Great. So I guess I just have one more question about COVID and this trip. What would happen to our trip if there was another shutdown or quarantine?
Yeah, we've had lots of practice of that, unfortunately. So we have a couple of options. The option that was most used was we just simply look for future dates. We find a date that is compatible and agreeable. In most cases, for those groups in 2020, it's actually been in 2022, and some of them in 2023. So we're not talking 6 months down the road. We're talking maybe 18 months or longer. And then we give people the option if they would like to go on the other dates, then we will simply roll all the money that's on hand into a new account for them. So everything stays exactly the same. No money is lost. If you decided that you didn't want to go because you couldn't dates or something like that, there is a cancellation policy that's listed in our brochure that you have access to digitally. It's very generous. It's usually just $100 and maybe less than $300 up to maybe 8 or 9 months from the trip, maybe less than that. But all of that is actually in there. And then if you had the insurance, you could, whatever you couldn't recover, which would be the cancellation penalty, then you would be able to recover from the insurance. And we are sorry we have to do that, but in most cases, we're doing it because we've actually placed deposits on your behalf with other organizations, the coach company, the guide that we're using, the hotels that we're using. And if we can't recover that from them, then we can't give it back to you, which is the only problem with you rolling over. So if we happen to have a situation where we weren't able to move forward with the trip, let's say that in 6 months from now, there's only 5 people that have said that they're interested in traveling, then it's not a problem for us to go ahead and cancel the trip. The only cancellation at that point, and most of the time that we can do, unless we're very late in the process, is a $100 non-refundable. And that's just to cover the work that we've done in preparing itineraries and pricing things and all of that. So we try to be as generous as we can. And for groups that did happen to cancel, we were able to recover, I believe, and this is me going from my memory, which isn't always the best, I believe we were able to recover 93% of the monies that have been paid in when we started this process with COVID in 2020. And it affected a lot of groups. So we had a lot of experience with it.
Very good. Well, thank you for answering all these questions today. I know that there's a lot to consider when someone or when deciding whether to go on a trip like this. So I think this information is helpful. We need to know about itinerary, and we need to know about all the pricing and value and all those things. And you've done a really great job helping us to understand what it is that we are embarking on. So to all of our people listening and watching, I hope that you will prayerfully consider this pilgrimage. It's an invitation from God, I think, to step away from where you are and to go and discover something new. So thank you, Darren.
Thank you. My pleasure.